he was obviously very good at languages, and that was what put him in the
crosshairs of the spies.
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, it put him on the sort of the radar of MI6 when he got to.
You actually have a book that's brand new now coming out called Eagle in the Mirror. Guys, if you're still watching this video and you haven't yet hit that subscribe button, please take 2 seconds and go hit it right now. Thank you.
Yeah.
And this one I really want to dig into because I haven't had the chance to read this yet.
Yeah.
But I was pretty stunned at the synopsis of who this is and looking up this guy who is dead now, who you obviously spent a lot of time with as trying to repiece together what was this man's life on your own, who not only was at the middle of spying at the highest levels of World War II, but was intricately involved in some ways that I was unfamiliar with in even like the creation of our CIA here in America as a guy who was supposedly MI6. This is a story that involves accusations being thrown around about his allegiances, being a double spy, triple spy, all that. But to just start it off, how did you even hear about this guy? Charles Howard Dick Ellis was his cover name, I guess, in MI6, right?
So after I finished Pure Narco, the pandemic hit the world, completely kind of wrecked the promotional campaign for Pure Narco. Lewis couldn't come out to Australia. I couldn't come to the United States. It was a disaster, really. The timing was terrible for us. And then I wanted to write another book, but I could not go anywhere. I was stuck at home. There was nothing that I could do other than essentially go to the supermarket, buy groceries, or go to thrift shops in the morning. Before I think noon. I think they just sort of stayed open.
They let the thrift shops stay open.
They let some thrift shops stay open. I guess because they're charities. Anyway, and you couldn't even sit in a cafe in Sydney. You couldn't sit at a cafe table. Yeah. It was ridiculous.
Australia was crazy with the pandemic.
It was crazy, and people couldn't play basketball, and there were literally like helicopters turning up with police.
Oh yeah,
and saying get off the fucking court, go home, and so I was spending a lot of time just sort of sitting at home. Going to thrift shops and buying CDs and old books. And my father was doing the same thing. And he called me up one day and said, Jess, by the way, look up this guy, Dick Ellis. I just bought a book and it mentions this guy called Dick Ellis. He's Australian. He was involved in espionage. He was accused of being a Nazi Soviet spy. And I was like, what? I'd never heard of the guy. The amazing thing was he actually came from the same suburb, Annandale in Sydney, where my father lives. Mm. And I thought, wow, what a story. I've never heard of this bloke. And started looking into it. And the great thing was that because of the pandemic, the National Archives in London decided to sort of make all their files downloadable for free. So while I was being stuck in Sydney, I could download thousands of files from MI5.
Is that who Andy? Is that what Andy used? He used that.
Yeah.
Oh wow! So you were allowed to do that online.
So instead of paying £3.50 for every file that you downloaded, it was all free, right? So I downloaded 2,000, 3,000 files.
That'll do it.
Yeah, but they're hundreds of pages long in each file, right? And so I had so much material. I didn't have to travel to London to get the stuff. I ended up sort of basically just doing, internet research into Dick Ellis, and suddenly I had, 5,000 files on my computer, and I thought, well, this is the start of me trying to figure out who this guy was. And the thing was, it was really just a sentence at a time from whatever document, and then piecing it together with a sentence from another document, and then suddenly putting together a timeline of this guy's life, trying to figure out where he was. And suddenly I had sort of a very rough sketch of kind of his life from 1895 in Sydney through to 1975 when he died in England, and throughout the 80 years that he was alive, he was involved in the biggest events of the century. World War One, the Russian Civil War, World War Two, creation of the OSS, which became the CIA, the Cold War. You name it. He was involved in all these things, and he was a fascinating person because he was a self-educated Australian guy who was born in fairly impoverished circumstances. His mother died when he was very young. His father had no money. He was sort of shuttled around sort of farms and boarding houses when he was a kid with his brother. He decided to sort of take up classical music, became a very sort of accomplished classical musician, then went off to England at the start of the First World War, enlisted in the British Army, sort of went to the Western Front, then became an expert in languages. So he ended up sort of speaking like 7 or 8 languages.
Like during the war?
Yeah, so he started studying Russian towards the end of the First World War. He was sort of picked up by the intelligence corps of the British Army for his sort of facility in Russian. He became a king's messenger for the King of England, which is like a courier, an official courier for the King of England.
Were you able to find any, I don't know if it would be any first-person stuff, but any type of research on his takeaways, his emotions, his mind state regarding World War I and what that was like being in the trenches there? Because it's kind of, when you look at history, I like to study World War I as much as I can because it's almost like the forgotten of the two. We all love studying World War II, but World War I is really what started World War II, and it was a crazy battlefield type in that war. I mean, these guys were, it was brutality at its worst.
Yeah, and he was injured like 3 times and just thrown back in every time after he recovered. So, but getting back to your question, no, it was very difficult to sort of get any kind of insight into what was going on in his mind and anything like that because he never really wrote about himself. And so there wasn't much documentation about Ellis. There were like some papers in the National Library of Australia, which included sort of a typewritten sort of piece by Ellis about his early life in Australia. So that sort of formed the basis of like the first part of the book about growing up in Australia. I couldn't have done it without those papers. But beyond that, it was very difficult to kind of get a sense of where exactly he was in the First World War. I mean, I obviously got his, military reports and things like that, but they only tell you so much. But the thing was with Ellis, he was obviously very good at languages, and that was what sort of put him in the
crosshairs of the spies.
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, it put him on the sort of the radar of MI6 when he got to Oxford University. So he started studying Russian at Oxford, and he was only there for a very short time. It was about a year before he ended up being sent off to Constantinople, which is Istanbul. And his job was essentially intelligence gathering. The main enemy was obviously the Soviet Union. The Russian Revolution had happened, and obviously everyone in the West was worried that the communism was going to spread to the West. And he was sort of an expert in sort of Russian and Russian affairs, and that was really how his intelligence career started in the early 1920s. And then he was sent off to Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and all through the 30s and 40s. His main target was obviously the Soviet Union.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.